Hello, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, and welcome to another edition of Not Another Sports Show, a radical look at the world of sports, left sports media, a weekly news hour highlighting the intersections of the world of sports, politics, and radical activism. We have a absolutely stacked show here at Not Another Sports Show, and we are also available for podcasts on iTunes, Stitcher, the Google Play Store, as well as being broadcast by any Pacific Radio member network stations, college and community radio stations, and low-power FM stations, as a number already are. If you can't listen live, we are available via podcast and with video editions thanks to our friends at Urbana Public Television. To contact the show, you can use at NAS Radio Sports on Twitter, Not Another Sports Show on Facebook, or the NAS Radio hashtag to get in touch with us. And we have got an absolutely full show. Last week, we had Dr. David J. Leonard on talking about his book, Playing While White, Power and Privilege on and Off the Field. And it was a very intriguing and interesting discussion that we had with him. And so we have a whole host of stories to get into. And so we're going to get right into it with some big props to WNBA star Brittney Griner. She donated $5,000 to the LGBTQ Youth Center in Phoenix, Arizona, the 1 in 10 center that was recently attacked by an arsonist. So big props to Brittney Griner for that kind of support. But we have a absolutely full broadcast here. We're going to be talking Colin Kaepernick, concussions, Adrian Beltre's 3,000th hit, and why not everybody seems to be happy with that. More about the horrible, no good, very bad, terrible NCAA, and if we have time, even a little chat on LeVar Ball. All that and more this week here on Not Another Sports Show, a radical look at the world of sports, left sports radio. So let's get right into it, talking this week in the NFL. In NFL news, we are on Colin Kaepernick watch. Colin Kaepernick is still in the top 50 of jersey sales, despite being a free agent. That he is outselling many, many other people in jersey sales, even though he is not currently playing for a team. And Kansas City owner Clark Hunt said that he would actually not have a problem signing Colin Kaepernick if their general manager Brett Veach or their head coach Andy Reid wanted him, saying, quote, "Now there are certain circumstances where guys get in trouble off the field, and that is something as an organization and as a family we care about, but we're not going to bring those types of players in. In terms of a player like Colin, I would have no hesitation bringing him into the organization," close quote. The team, of course, doesn't necessarily need a quarterback, so these words, while laudable, are also kind of hollow because they're not in the market for a quarterback. They recently got a quarterback in the first round of the draft, and they have Alex Smith lost his starting job with the San Francisco 49ers to Colin Kaepernick a number of years ago. And so it's certainly heartening to see owners like the Kansas City owner come out and say that he'd be willing to sign Colin Kaepernick if they wanted him for the team. But it's kind of a hollow sentiment at the same time because he's not needed by that team. But the team that does need a quarterback, the Baltimore Ravens. The Baltimore Ravens might need a backup quarterback because Joe Flacco has a back injury that's causing some problems. He may miss some time during the season when he's facing being battered around by defenses and defensive linemen all season. It may be very well that he goes down at some point during the season, and they'd need a capable backup to come in and be serviceable. And so the Baltimore Ravens announced that they were going to talk to Colin Kaepernick, and that perhaps Colin Kaepernick was going to be the person that they were going to bring in to take up this backup job for Joe Flacco. And the team, when they said that they were announcing it, did not necessarily announce anything about football play. The owner, Steve Bisciotti, announced that he was going to talk to fans and he was going to talk to sponsors. The owner, Steve Biscotti, said he was going to talk to fans and sponsors. He did not mention anything about football in this at all. He said he was going to talk to fans and sponsors, and that was going to be it. So this statement by this owner essentially eliminates one of the main arguments that a lot of anti-Kaepernick people have, which is that he is simply not good enough to be in the league. The fact that the owners of multiple teams have all now said they're not concerned about the football aspect at all, and that's very much laid clear here by the owner of the Baltimore Ravens, that he's not concerned with the football aspect here. That's the issue. That it's the off-the-field stuff, the things that we've been talking about of holding him accountable for his political statements, his political stands, and that being problematic. That what he did last season, they're still holding him accountable for, even though he is better than a number of players who have already been signed to rosters and put on as backups. In fact, I mean, the numbers themselves, 16 touchdowns, 4 interceptions, for a team where you or I essentially could have been the wide receiving core of the San Francisco 49ers last season. That when you throw 16 touchdowns and only 4 interceptions with a wide receiving core that seems like they just went to the local bus station and started picking guys up, it's not Cap's fault. And if you want to argue that Cap's had only, he had less than 60% of his passes get completed last season. Yeah, that may very well be true, but not every pass that is an incomplete pass is blamed on the quarterback. When you look at the 2016 data for dropped passes by wide receivers, the San Francisco 49ers are in second place among all teams in the league. That the wide receivers dropped more passes than almost every team in the league. So to say that Colin Kaepernick only completed 59% of his passes is certainly true, but it does obscure the fact that they were number 2 in drops in 2016. That the wide receivers dropped more passes than just about every single team in the league. And overall, Colin Kaepernick had a 90.7 quarterback rating for the entire season. And when you adjust for once he got kind of into the habit of actually starting, he was getting over 100% for his overall rating, that he was getting over 100 in those games. So the fact that you're going to argue he can't play, not only is it belied by the data, it's also undercut and it's also destroyed by the simple fact that the Ravens owner himself said he doesn't necessarily worry about the football, that he's going to solely talk to fans and sponsors about whether or not they want them on the team. And since they asked for fans to start talking, a number of reactionaries have all said that they don't want Colin Kaepernick on their team, that they don't want this guy on the team. And when people have tried to call Ravens headquarters and report that they want Colin Kaepernick to be employed by the team, they've been getting hung up on, or staff is refusing to take the messages, according to the activist group Color of Change, who has started a campaign to try to help Colin Kaepernick become employed. So when you're not hearing from the fans who want Kaepernick, it kind of undercuts the whole wanting to hear from the fans thing. It really feels like he wanted the excuse that Giants owner John Mara has, which is that a whole host of fans all wrote to him and said they never want Colin Kaepernick on their team. It seems like he wants that kind of excuse. He wants that sort of thing to say, well, I was really interested in wanting to sign him, but the fans wouldn't have it, and it was going to cost me money. So the owner also called former face of the franchise, defensive star Ray Lewis. This is a guy who in 2011 uttered quite possibly one of my favorite quotes ever. They were talking about the impending lockout, that the owners were going to lock the players out. And Ray Lewis said that there was going to be an increase in crime because without the NFL, quote, There's nothing else to do. This is a guy who thought that there was going to be an uptick in crime when the NFL was off televisions because the owners had locked out the players. This is also a guy who, with Jim Brown, shilled for our current U.S. President, Donald Trump, saying, quote, urban development and job creation are everything. What we believe with the Trump administration is if we can combine these two powers of coming together, forget black or white. Black or white is irrelevant. The bottom line is job creation and economic development in these urban areas to change the whole scheme of what our kids see, close quote. Well, it makes me wonder, what about urban job development? Have we seen any urban job development at all? Have we seen any kind of urban development or job creation happening? No? No, it's been about a half a year now. And Ray Lewis hasn't said a single thing about this policy that he was oft trumpeting publicly during the president's campaign. Lewis also took to social media this week and made a video advising Colin Kaepernick to keep his activism to himself and not let many people know what he's doing, saying, quote, if you do nothing else, young man, get back on the football field, and what you do off the field, don't let too many people know, close quote. That just takes the idea of activism and negates it completely. Be an activist all you want, but don't raise any awareness about what you're doing. How do those two things make sense at all? Be an activist, but don't raise awareness and don't tell people what you're doing. But be active and be an activist. That's fine. He also said, quote, the mistakes I've made, I've never repeated twice, close quote. Okay, that's true. This is a guy who took a plea deal for obstruction of justice. And that certainly never happened again. But to say what Colin Kaepernick did was a mistake is wrong-headed. It's like we talked about with Michael Vick a couple of weeks ago on the show, where Vick talking about apologizing and coming out and being apologetic and coming out and being contrite was necessary because Michael Vick had committed a crime and he was trying to get back in the good graces of the league. What Colin Kaepernick did was not a crime. It's not anywhere near the same thing at all. This is not similar at all. He knelt during a song, and we have people who are trying to argue that this is worse than some criminal behaviors, including anonymous NFL front offices even saying that they haven't met a guy as disliked as Colin Kaepernick since Ray Caruth, the former Carolina Panthers receiver who engaged in a murder for hire that killed his then pregnant girlfriend, trying to get rid of the kid as well because he didn't want to pay child support. Kneeling during a song, murder for hire. Apparently people are conflating these things. Well, Shannon Sharpe took Ray Lewis down a few pegs on the Undefeated on ESPN. Ray Lewis started talking about the murders in Baltimore and how people aren't caring about all the murders, the typical stuff you hear from All Lives Matter folk. And Sharpe noted what we've talked about before and other critics have talked about before, is that there is the expectation of a person who kills as a civilian to be arrested, to go to trial, to very likely be found guilty. That there is that expectation that they will be held to the full accountability of the law, that they will be held to the full standard of the law, that there is that expectation. And there is not that expectation when we look at police killing people, especially unarmed people. That there is no expectation that the police are going to be charged. There is no expectation that the police are going to be arrested. There is no explanation and expectation of why officers are largely just allowed to go free and back to the force. That there is no expectation of them facing accountability. There is no explanation as to why that is not the case happening. And to argue that there is somehow, people aren't paying attention to all the murders, it's a deflection. It's a deflectionary tactic, and we tried to get Gus Wood, U of I grad student, member of Black Students for Revolution, in the studio for this week's show, but unfortunately, due to a scheduling conflict, he wasn't able to make it in. So we're going to try to get him in very soon to start talking about Ray Lewis's comments, especially with Colin Kaepernick's girlfriend also posting a picture of Ray Lewis and the Ravens owner, Steve Bisciotti, and then posting a still image beneath it from the movie Django Unchained, showing an enslaved person holding Leonardo DiCaprio's slave owner character and crying. And people got mad, and people were saying that this was offensive and upsetting, and largely the point that she was trying to make is certainly one, it's the same I have black friends argument, so I can't be racist. You know, that same point that gets trotted out time after time whenever somebody does something that could be seen as racially insensitive, that they highlight their black friend or they highlight their one person of color that they can go talk to and say, see, I'm not a racist. That it's largely that point. And the tone policing completely misses this issue. It's respectability politics all over again. That Colin Kaepernick is already still a free agent. He's already being politically blackballed. That one Twitter picture is not going to change that. And the fact that she posted that kind of image is not a game changer about the issue. The issue is that you have people who are telling this owner what he wants to hear, that they don't want Cap on their team because they're magically more outraged about that than they are about a lot of other stuff that's happening in their community. They're more outraged about what's happening with Colin Kaepernick being on their team, or the fact that Colin Kaepernick wore pig socks with police officers' hats on them, than they are what the actual police are doing. This is the same city, Baltimore, which was the host of a baseball game played in front of an empty stadium after the protests and the uprising over the police killing of Freddie Gray. And we saw the Baltimore Orioles speak out. That we saw players speak out. First baseman Chris Davis saying the protesters were, quote, rightfully, quote, quote, upset. Adam Jones talking about them, quote, fighting for a good cause, close quote. The COO, the son of the owner, John Angelos, said that, quote, it is critical that in any democracy, investigation must be completed and due process must be honored before any government or police members are judged responsible. That said, my greater source of personal concern, outrage, and sympathy beyond this particular case is focused neither upon one night's property damage nor upon the acts, but focused rather upon the past 4-decade period during which American political elites have shipped middle-class and working-class jobs away from Baltimore and cities and towns around the United States to third-world dictatorships like China's and others, plunged tens of millions of good, hard-working Americans into economic devastation, and then followed that action around the nation by diminishing every American's civil rights protections in order to control an unfairly impoverished population living under an ever-declining standard of living and suffering at the butt end of an ever more militarized and aggressive surveillance state, close quote. We also saw Buck Showalter asked to condemn the uprising and said, quote, you hear people try to weigh in on things that they don't really know anything about. I've never been black, okay? So I don't know. I can't put myself there. I've never faced the challenges that they face, so I understand the emotion, but I can't. It's a pet peeve of mine when somebody says, well, I know what they're feeling. Why don't they just do this? Why don't somebody do that? You've never been black, okay? So just slow down a little bit. I try to not get involved in something that I don't know about, but I do know that if it's something that's very passionate, something that I am with my upbringing, that it bothers me and it bothers everybody else. We've made quite a statement as a city, some good and some bad. Now let's get on with taking the statements we've made and create a positive. So we've seen this solidarity happen from the sports world, that Colin Kaepernick is not going to necessarily be an outlier in this city. And it always, always amazes me and makes me wonder, are people more upset at Colin Kaepernick kneeling during a song than they are what the police in Baltimore have actually done? Are they more mad that Colin Kaepernick wore pig socks with police officer hats on them than they are what the actual Baltimore police have actually done? That just recently in Baltimore, we've had 2 videos of Baltimore police being shown as if they are planting drugs on crime scenes and on suspects before the arrest. that we've got 2 instances of this. The state's attorney's office has already announced that it dismissed or is ready to dismiss 41 cases because of the first video, and another 55 cases being under review from the first video that came out. Then, just on August 3rd, we had a second video of officers pretty much apparently looking like they're planting drugs in the video. And so we have people putting on their capes for and riding for police departments like the Baltimore PD. Are you more mad about socks? Or are you more mad about what the Baltimore police is actually doing? Are you more mad about a guy who knelt for a song? Or are you more mad that people are possibly being put in prison unlawfully? But it's Cap who's taking a knee and wearing socks that's causing the real disrespect to the police, right? It's not the fact that they're caught on tape looking like they're planting evidence on people. That couldn't be it at all. Or the impunity of police when they've shot and killed unarmed people, even on tape. That couldn't be causing the disrespect to the police. No, it's a lot more simple and it's a lot more wrong to say it's Cap and the socks. The Ravens have also announced that they have signed quarterback David Olson, a quarterback who played 2 games in college. He was a backup. He played 0 games in the NFL. He went to the Arena League briefly, and then he left football in general and became a realtor. Yes, that guy who has no NFL experience, David Olson, has been signed by the Baltimore Ravens. The guy left the league and became a realtor, while Colin Kaepernick is still a free agent. And they've said that this is just an arm for the training camps, that this doesn't necessarily mean that they won't sign Colin Kaepernick or any other quarterback in the coming days, in the coming weeks. But it's certainly not good optics when you're bringing in a guy who left the league because he couldn't get in to become a realtor, then actually address the meaningful issues here. Malcolm Jenkins, the Eagles' defensive player from Philadelphia, said, quote, "This is just some other teams being quite honestly cowards to say that they're afraid of backlash to sign someone to make their team better when fans' input has never been in the equation and when it comes to signing people in the past. It's certain owners' way of making an example out of Kaepernick to discourage anybody else from doing what he did. 4 months ago, there was a debate as to whether Kaepernick is talented enough or whatever. I think at this point in time, when you look at the quarterbacks who have jobs around the league and an amount of other owners and GMs who have only spoken of what fans would think about his stance, I think it's safe to throw out the talent argument and basically focus on the fact that he doesn't have a job solely because he didn't stand for the anthem last year, even though he already expressed that he planned on standing this year. That message to me is loud and clear from owners as to where their priorities stand and how they go about picking and choosing who they want on their teams. It's definitely unfortunate, but it's shining a light on just how the NFL operates and what we deem as acceptable. It really has nothing to do with what's right or wrong, but what affects dollars. That business as usual, I think, is an unfortunate precedent to set." Close quote. Seattle Seahawks defensive star Richard Sherman also weighed in, saying, quote, "It's not about football or color, it's about, boy, stay in your place. Not a lot of guys are willing to step out there, so the guys not speaking up for him are doing him a disservice. There should be a lot more guys saying something. Most guys are like, I don't want my job to end up the same way. Now, if you told me this guy threw 8 pick sixes last year and played like a bum, had no talent, that's one thing. But Ryan Fitzpatrick, Ryan Mallett, or whoever is playing for the Jets right now, whoever is starting for the Jets is terrible, have jobs. You're telling me fans would rather have you lose and put a worse player out there because a guy took a stand? That's where it's so troublesome to me. Blake Bortles has shown you enough to where you don't think Cap would be a solid fit? Cap has actually won games. And this is largely it. The talent argument flies out the window when you look at the fact that you have all of these other quarterbacks being signed by the league. When you have all of these other individuals being signed by the league, it completely undercuts the talent argument and solely looks at the political aspects of this. And when the Ravens want to hear from fans, they don't want to hear from fans who are supportive, apparently. In other NFL news, we've got an update on concussion spectrum injuries. In 2012, the National Football League went on a full public relations campaign about a $30 million grant donation that they were making to the National Institute of Health, the NIH, for concussion spectrum injury research. Well, the National Institute of Health this week announced that they have only been given $14 million of that $30 million, and that there is no plan to use the remaining $16 million before the agreement ends on August 31st, 2017. And that's largely because of a falling out between the NFL and the National Institute of Health in 2015. Investigative reports by Outside the Lines found that the NFL tried to prevent money from their $30 million no strings attached grant to be used to fund a Boston University study about the chronic traumatic encephalopathy, the trauma-induced brain disorder, because their lead physician, Dr. Robert Stern, had criticized NFL concussion policies very often and very publicly. But this money was supposed to be no strings attached, and they tried to prevent money from going in, but no strings attached. They also noted that the NFL was trying to send money to doctors that currently worked with the NFL or previously worked with the NFL or have business relationships with the NFL, rather than sending it to total third parties. So no strings attached really doesn't mean no strings attached, because the NFL is very much trying to meddle in who's going to get this money, when they're going to get this money, how it's going to look, that they're very much meddling here. And instead of trying to just take the NFL's money for this no strings attached research, which came with plenty of meddling, the National Institute of Health, the NIH, instead just decided to use taxpayer money and refused to use any of the NFL's money to just keep them out of it, because the NFL was trying to meddle so hard. The NFL, of course, denies that they did any of this. They also deny what the House Committee on Energy and Commerce noted as, quote, acting improperly and attempting to influence the outcome, close quote, of the grants that were using the NFL's funds. So no strings attached means apparently trying to influence the outcome and meddle all the time. But of course, the NFL is denying any of this, and the National Institute of Health has announced that they're simply just going to forego the remaining money in the grant that was offered to them, because it's not worth the hassle, it's not worth meddling from the NFL. Meanwhile, Boston University research showed that chronic traumatic encephalopathy, the trauma-induced brain disorder, was diagnosed in 177 of 202 former athletes, including 110 of 111 former NFL players. Now, confirmation bias is certainly a thing here, that you're only looking at players who have donated their brains, and they're largely donating their brains because they think that they have a problem. That said, the science here, looking at the subconcussive blows and the issues of concussion spectrum injuries, we can very clearly say that being hit in the head over and over and over again is not conducive to the brain's health. And there might be variance in variables, looking at people's diets, looking at people's health habits, that may have some individualized aspects to this of, individuals' health concerns and their family health history may play a role in this as well. But we can largely say that subconcussive hits and this kind of hard, violent play is not conducive to the brain's long-term health, even with the confirmation bias and those things notwithstanding. You're listening to Not Another Sports Show, a radical look at the world of sports, left sports media, and we've just been discussing Colin Kaepernick and the saga of the Baltimore Ravens signing him, as well as the National Institute of Health walking away from $16 million of NFL grant money over the league scheming and meddling while saying that their donation was no strings attached, because they wanted to be seen as one thing while they wanted the research to be guided a certainly different way. Coming up on Not Another Sports Show, Radical Look at the World of Sports, Left Sports Media, we will be analyzing Adrian Beltre getting his 3,000th hit and not everybody being happy, as well as the latest adults getting rich while denying the athletes whose labor makes that money from getting paid in college sports news. So we are going to jump straight in to Major League Baseball news and talk a little bit about Adrian Beltre getting his 3,000th hit. Big congrats to Texas Ranger third baseman Adrian Beltre for getting his 3,000th hit. And in the annals of baseball, getting 3,000 hits is pretty much a lock for Hall of Fame status. And so 3,000 hits is a big milestone in Major League Baseball. It has been very typified and connected to Hall of Fame status, and it's a rare occurrence when it does happen, and Adrian Beltre was able to get there since we've last been on the air. He got his 3,000th hit, and it became big news of celebrations for this huge accomplishment for Adrian Beltre. But not everybody was so joyous. Not everybody was so happy. Fox Sports host Doug Gottlieb took to social media saying that we should be questioning Adrian Beltre. Saying, quote, Adrian Beltre with very rare offensive explosion in his 30s, forgive me if I wonder, close quote. He then went on to try to explain why he was wondering about Adrian Beltre, because we have no evidence to wonder anything about Adrian Beltre, saying that, quote, 54 players have been suspended in Major League Baseball, 20 of them have been from the Dominican Republic, close quote. He then tried to use that statistic to justify thinking that Adrian Beltre is using performance-enhancing drugs. It makes him wonder because 20 out of 45 have been from the Dominican Republic. It makes him wonder that Adrian Beltre might not be clean. He also said, quote, it's legal, it's over-the-counter, and there's a different culture there than there is here. Yeah, there certainly might be a different culture. I think that culture may have to do with evidence-based reasoning, because this is not evidence-based reasoning at all. He points out this statistic about 20 people out of 45 being suspended, being from the Dominican Republic, and then jumps over this huge Evel Knievel-style chasm to try to get to the point that Adrian Beltre may be using. He then said, quote, that's what really smart people do. They question, close quote. And yes, really smart people do question things. We're inquisitive. How certain things work. Why certain things are the way they are. That we tend to question those things. But there's a limit to where questioning things becomes a hallmark of very smart people and goes down the conspiratorial tinfoil hat rabbit hole. That I can question all sorts of things, like, did the KGB put a bomb under my car while I'm doing this radio show? Certainly anything's possible, but the law of averages would probably say it's infinitesimally small. Not something to really question and worry about. When we have absolutely no evidence of Adrian Beltre using any kind of PEDs, the kind of nonsense of simply using his nationality from being from the Dominican Republic as a reason to doubt his statistics isn't questioning. It's just throwing out an insult and thinking it might stick. I'm just wondering this. Yeah, you can wonder that all you want, but you need evidence to back yourself up, and you don't have any about Adrian Beltre. You have nothing, zero, zip, zilch. Now, he was rightly called xenophobic. Some people even called him racist for it. And he pushed back that it was not him, but his critics who were using the race card. I'm sorry. Our whole argument wasn't based on someone's nationality. That's kind of what xenophobic is. It's kind of what racist is. If you're going to base your whole crux of your argument being on this is the place that he's from, then you better have something more than that to back you up, because simply just saying he's from this place means he's bad or likely dirty is a problem. And let's look at the numbers and see this supposed offensive explosion. In his 20s, Adrian Beltre hit a .273 average. He had 26 home runs, 92 RBIs, and a .791 on-base plus slugging percentage. It should also be noted that he was playing in a notorious pitcher's park, and he was playing for the Seattle Mariners. In his 30s, he saw a small uptick in average to .305. He hit 3 more home runs, 29 home runs, an average of 101 RBIs, and an .863 on-base plus slugging percentage. The very likely explanation as to why you saw the uptick in numbers in the 30s is he went from a pitcher's park to playing in a hitter-friendly ballpark. He's been playing in Texas since 2011, a notorious bandbox, a notorious hitter-friendly park. That's what caused the uptick. That's the very likely idea of what caused the uptick. Not because of where he's from, not because of the idea that he's Dominican. That's not why he hit this. It's a bad look on Doug Gottlieb. It's beneath the idea of sports media to start putting this kind of unscientific, completely ludicrous stuff out there and then just saying, that's what smart people do, we question, and forgive me if I wonder. No, it's not that you wondered that's the problem. It's what you were wondering about and the implications of what you were wondering that were problematic. We can certainly have very real discussions about the realities of Major League Baseball in places like the Dominican Republic and how it's arguably exploitative what they're doing to talent there, signing a huge number of players for very little money and increasing their profit margins to try to bring in more and more talent and more players in places like the Dominican Republic and preying off of institutional poverty, preying off of institutional problems. We can certainly have a discussion about that, but that's not what this was at all. This was simply just throwing something out there about a guy who did something very amazing and trying to paint him improperly and wrongly simply because of his place of origin. It was problematic. And again, congrats to Adrian Beltre for getting his 3,000th hit. In unpaid college sports news, we have an update from Temple University. That Temple University has announced that they are going to allow donors to sponsor the numbers 1 through 9 that are worn by the football players this season. The cost of sponsoring number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, number 5, number 6, number 7, number 8, or number 9, that number is $50,000. $50,000 to sponsor one of these numbers. The donors will get to travel on the team plane for one away game. They will get a custom jersey of that number, and also, and this is very vague, interact with the student athlete throughout the year. So, the NCAA has made a big argument that they don't commodify specific players. When criticisms of the NCAA have come up, they always argue that they are putting the team or the conference, those things first, and they're not trying to publicize any one particular player, that they're not they're not purposely putting any one particular player. Of course, we all know that's a load of garbage, it's a load of crap, because you can go back and you can see how they were selling jerseys. If you search the NCAA store for Manziel a couple of years ago, his Texas A&M jersey would pop up. It was very clear that they were marketing and profiting off of individual athletes in video games and all those sorts of things, which was a large part of the class action lawsuit against the NCAA. How is this not just profiting off of these 9 individuals? The NCAA has apparently said this is okay, that they are fine with this kind of direct profiting off of individual athletes, and forcing them to interact with these $50,000 donors, that they're going to be forced into interactions that they might not want to be involved in, that they might not be okay with, that are going to take away from their education. You know, that thing that you talk about being so important, that you're taking time away from their educations, that thing that, again, they're saying is the vital part of this. And if you say that their scholarship is payment, that they're scholarship athletes and that's their payment, one, I don't agree with you, because, well, we've seen logic and reality show that these scholarships are not payment for the money that's brought in. These are not payment in any sense of the word, because we have academic assistants and research assistants at universities who not only get their scholarship, but they also get a stipend for what they've done. They not only get a scholarship, but they also get a stipend. So the idea of a scholarship being sole payment for athletes falls apart on its face looking at the collegiate model. But if you are going to run the route and say that this is being paid, then what you have to recognize is adding more to their workload is a pay cut. And who out here is doing more for less? Who out here is going to argue, yeah, I'm going to do more, and I'm going to accept the same amount of pay for it. I'm going to go tell my boss, I want to go do more, and accept the same amount of pay for it, and not expect a raise. Who out here is hustling for a pay cut? No, but you seem to be okay with it for other people. That is, if you believe the idea of scholarships being payment in the first place. In other NCAA needs to go away news, the University of Central Florida and their kicker Donald De La Haye are back in the news, because De La Haye has been ruled ineligible by the NCAA for the entire upcoming season because he dared to monetize YouTube videos that had him involved in his collegiate athletics. That he monetized YouTube videos that included conversation and the fact that he is a player on the UCF football team. That he monetized YouTube videos showing part of his life. That's why they banned him. He made YouTube videos showing that he was in football, and monetized those things. That's why they got mad. That's why they banned him for a year. The NCAA said, quote, although Donald De La Haye has chosen not to compete any longer as a UCF student-athlete, he could have continued playing football for the university and earn money from non-athletic YouTube videos based on a waiver the NCAA granted July 14th. Close quote. See, guys? See? We're not the bad guys. Yeah, you are. You let him have this waiver because you knew not letting him have this waiver was going to come down like a ton of bricks on you. They continued, quote, De La Haye decided that he did not want to separate his athletically related videos from non-athletic ones. He could monetize, which was outlined in the waiver for him to maintain eligibility. Contrary to misconceptions, making a YouTube video and even making money off it is not a violation of an NCAA rule. Further, years ago, the membership gave NCAA staff the ability to review situations on a case-by-case basis consistent with previous actions. After the national office received the waiver request from UCF July 12th, that process was used to confirm that David De La Haye would continue to profit from any video activity as long as it was not based on his athletics, reputation, prestige, or ability. Because remember, only the NCAA, the conferences, the schools, and all the adults get to profit off the player's ability, prestige, and reputation. Those are the only people that can be making money off this. They're really seriously just trying to keep people broke. You're listening to Not Another Sports Show, a radical look at the world of sports, left sports media. We've just been discussing various attempts to attack Adrian Beltre's reputation as he earned his 3,000th hit, and some reasons why the corrupt vampire that is the NCAA needs to go away and not come back. Coming up on Not Another Sports Show, a radical look at the world of sports, left sports media, we're going to be analyzing the latest in the garbage fire that is the impending Conor McGregor-Floyd Mayweather fight, and we'll have a little chat about LeVar Ball. Coming up in our last segment of Other Sports News. In other sports news this week, we have the garbage fire, the trash fire. I'd call it a clown show, but clown shows are actually funny. The impending fight between Conor McGregor and Floyd Mayweather. And I'd tell you when the fight is, but I don't really care to go look it up. I don't really care to do any research about it. And when the fight actually takes place, I'm going to follow the advice of Paul Anka from that Simpsons episode, just don't look. Just don't look. In fact, if anything, I'm probably going to make a donation to a domestic violence charity rather for the cost of the pay-per-view rather than give my money to either one of these two guys. And we've seen the train wreck, the garbage fire that was the 4 day of press tours that happened between these two guys, with the homophobic slurs and the casual racism and just really horrendous stuff. Well, we've had more mess fall out of Conor McGregor's word hole. And this time we need to talk about the inappropriateness of it. And trigger warning, we are going to be talking about issues of domestic violence here. You can go back, you can listen to our previous broadcast where we talked about the press conferences that were just an absolute dumpster fire of terrible. But during an Instagram argument between Conor McGregor and Golden State Warriors star Draymond Green, things got really disgusting. McGregor was wearing a Golden State Warriors jersey, the number 23, and Draymond Green chimed in saying, yeah, take that jersey off because it's also Draymond Green's number. And he said that he's a Mayweather supporter, the team's Mayweather supporters, so Conor McGregor should take that off. Just banter back and forth. Where things took a turn is when Conor McGregor said that he's not wearing a Draymond Green jersey, he's wearing a CJ Watson jersey. And it seems kind of innocuous to a lot of people just of him saying that. But if you know the background, you know the story, you know the history, it's far from innocuous, and it's incredibly problematic, and it's incredibly offensive. And it's making light of domestic violence. Back in the late 2010, 2011, according to reports and testimony, Floyd Mayweather allegedly saw texts between the C.J. Wilson, the star then of the Golden State Warriors, and the mother to three of his children, Josie Harris. He got mad about these alleged text messages that were being sent back and forth between the two of them, and he subsequently beat the mother of his children, Josie Harris, in front of the other kids. One of the kids actually filled out a witness statement about what he saw that night, and escaping and getting to call the police to have to deal with this. That's the C.J. Watson issue here. That Floyd Mayweather allegedly got mad about alleged texts from C.J. Watson to the mother of three of his kids, and then physically assaulted her. Mayweather ultimately for that was sentenced to 90 days in jail, of which he completed about 60 and then was let out for good behavior. Through her lawyer, Josie Harris and her lawyer had this statement to say, quote, Conor McGregor's exploitation of the events surrounding Mayweather's violent beating of Josie Harris for the sole purpose of promoting an upcoming boxing match and taunting his opponent in the ongoing media-driven feud between the two fighters demonstrates not only an insensitivity towards the emotional well-being and privacy of the victim of Mayweather's domestic violence, but also a general disregard for the physical and emotional trauma and long-lasting physical and psychological impacts suffered by the victims of domestic violence. And that's largely it. She had no say in this and was completely brought up in public and brought out there, not because Conor McGregor is some advocate for domestic violence, not because Conor McGregor really cares about domestic violence at all, but because he wanted to troll. And that's very interesting of how we code the language here, that when we're talking about people like Conor McGregor engaging in this kind of egregious behavior, it's trolling, and it's just something done to get under his opponent's skin, and we're more than willing to write it off. Even though it's incredibly problematic and it's incredibly wrong. Whereas in other cases, we're a lot less apt to write off some of the behavior. And we're going to talk a little bit about the father of Los Angeles Lakers player Lonzo Ball, the coach of the AAU team, and multiple-time media appearance star LeVar Ball. During a recent game, he earned a technical foul from a referee, a NCAA Division I women's basketball referee. And LeVar Ball threatened to take his team off the court and threatened to forfeit the game unless this official was replaced. And the organizers of the tournament, Adidas, the shoe company, did just that. Later on in that game, Ball got a second technical foul and was ejected from that game. After the game, LeVar Ball said that the ref, quote, needs to stay in her lane because she ain't ready for this, and, quote, if you're going to be qualified, you better be in shape and you better know the game, and she's bad for both of them. She's not in shape, she's not calling the game right, and she doesn't understand, so now she's trying to make the name for herself. So she's walking around like, I'm the only woman in here. Yeah, we get it. I don't care if you're a woman, a man, or whatever. Just be good at what you do, close quote. And yeah, the calls for apologies for this came very quickly and very rightly, and he said, quote, it's not about me hating that lady or something. She just got caught in a bad place messing with me. She good. She probably a great ref for the women. She's probably a great ref, but this men's stuff, it's a difference between women's basketball and men's basketball. Just because we go like that and don't hit the ball doesn't mean it's a foul. But don't get your feelings personal, and that's why people were like, but she's a great ref. To you, she's a great ref, not to me, close quote. And Adidas apologized for removing the referee, saying that the move was, quote, not in line with our company values, close quote. But it seems that their company values only came into play when the statement was getting blasted by the press, and we found out that Adidas was sending messages to referees in the days beforehand, saying not to give technicals to LeVar Ball, even if he earned behavior that would get him technicals, because people were coming to AAU games and wanting to see LeVar Ball. And so they wanted him out on the sidelines and not being ejected from the game, so they were asking and pressuring refs not to call technicals. Is that part of your company values too? The National Basketball Referees Association said that the situation was, quote, appalling, and called statements from LeVar Ball, quote, misogynistic. The group Court Club Elite, which provided referees to this Adidas tournament and also trains referees, announced that they are ending their 5-year deal with Adidas over this referee's removal, saying, quote, the events that led to the removal of a female official are something that shall not and will not be accepted within the officiating community. Adidas and their leadership acted in a manner that does not parallel our views on integrity or professionalism, and neither should be compromised as they were in this situation. It was clear that the actions of the official in enforcing and addressing unsporting behavior were defendable and fitting of the behavior displayed. However, the agenda and lack of courage to do the right thing by Adidas leadership sent a clear message that the game and those chosen to protect the integrity were not of priority. And it's not surprising to see Adidas fold faster than Superman on Laundry Day, and it's just highlighting another reason as to why we can't have corporations be the ones who are going to make these decisions for us. We can't have corporations be the ones who are going to make these arguments for us. And largely getting back to that issue I was talking about before, LeVar Ball is a father spending time with his kids. And some of these statements are a little bit outrageous. Some of the statements are a little bit, very amusing, of his kids being able to beat Michael Jordan, that he could beat Michael Jordan in one-on-one. Some of these statements being kind of harmlessly outrageous. And arguably, they didn't seem a whole lot different to me than some of these statements that have come out of the mouths of helicopter parents from my youth sports experiences and continuing to watch in youth sports experiences. It hasn't really seemed very much different from helicopter parents before. But largely, I think that's kind of coding that it's not all anti-blackness here. It's not all that. I understand that. You can be somebody who is very supportive of racial justice and not like LeVar Ball. I understand that. But I definitely feel that there are strains of anti-blackness in people who are opposed to LeVar Ball, and some of the pushback to him on some of the more outrageous statements that he's just made about his kids being good or him. And that we've seen some of that in this coded language. And it's always fun to see the media perceptions we talked about with Conor McGregor. What he's doing is quote-unquote trolling, and it's entertainment. But LeVar Ball coming out and making statements that exasperate Stephen A. Smith on ESPN are seen as problematic and attention-seeking, and throw in the negative statements that you want to throw in there. That it's not all sourced on anti-blackness, but there is a strain of it here in some of the pushback and how we code things of entertainment value coming from Conor McGregor, entertainment value coming from those people involved on that end, but it's being problematic when it's coming out of people like the mouth of LeVar Ball. And very little of what LeVar Ball has actually had to say has been truly offensive. I appreciate the kind of humor that is kind of the exasperated ideas of throwing stuff out there. He reminds me of a pro wrestling heel. He reminds me of a pro wrestling bad guy. Go out there, say stuff that's going to get the crowd interested, say stuff that is kind of outrageous, it's entertaining. Go out and say that sort of stuff. And I appreciate that, whether it's the kind of ironic humor of PFT commenter when he calls in on ESPN radio, or LeVar Ball going on TV and just getting Stephen A. Smith into a tizzy. I like those sorts of things. And as a pro wrestling fan, I see that very much here. It's the attention that he's getting is largely just innocuous stuff. That said, the comments in these cases, when challenged by women, the first time on Fox Sports, the second time by this female referee, need to be discussed and they need to be called out. This is the second time he's told a woman who's contradicted him publicly to, quote, stay in their lane. And it's also, needless comments about whether or not this woman's in shape and arguing about this woman's qualifications, which is very unlikely that he'd do if it was a male referee. And so while I like some of the bombastic ideas of LeVar Ball and some of the statements because they're kind of just innocuous statements being thrown out there and kind of fun statements being thrown out there, stuff like this, when it gets serious with these kinds of misogynistic statements, these kinds of problematic ideas, are the ones that need to be pushed back against. They're the ones that need to be called out, and they are the ones that need to be addressed. You've been listening to Not Another Sports Show, a radical look at the world of sports, Left Sports Media. A weekly news hour highlighting the various intersections overlapping the world of sports, activism, and radical politics. We are available for broadcast by Pacific Radio member network station, college and community radio stations, and low-power FM stations. If you can't listen live or you happen to miss any of today's broadcast, we're also available via audio podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, and through the Google Play Store. To reach us, you can use @NAS Radio Sports on Twitter, Not Another Sports Show on Facebook, or the NAS Radio hashtag to get in touch with us. For all of us here at Not Another Sports Show, a radical look at the world of sports, Left Sports Media, we will be back with you next week and hopefully have another interview, this time with author and writer Jessica Luther, coming on the show hopefully for next week. Talk to you then.